Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. Penultimate episode of Tune It Over for the year. If you haven't heard already, this is me wrapping the week up and hopefully then down in tools for a little bit of family time, as it's my twin's birthday on Sunday. Amazing that that's been a year. So for those that know, I've got two identical twin boys, Test and Control, as they're affectionately known on the internet, and they are coming up to a year old. They were born 20th of December, which as far as I'm aware is Sunday. Hopefully not getting that wrong. So I'm going to try and have a bit of downtime. And so we're doing a lot of summary episodes this week. Had a cracking one yesterday. Farouk and Evie came on and we talked about various different things and the way that the year has affected them. And there was no one better. I really wanted to get stuck into sort of the business variables of it, especially what it's meant for clinics. And there's no one better in and around my life than Rob Beaven to talk about that. A Chiro by background, and I'll get a chance for him to introduce himself. Runs a MDT clinic in this somewhere down south. I was about to misplace what town it was. And also someone who's just in and around our work this year and has become part of the Physio Matters team, an important moderator at Therapy Live, also a speaker at our June show. And so someone that rightly everyone's been paying attention to, but also someone who's very thoughtful in that business space and someone that's naturally had to navigate, as many of us have, those business variables that COVID has disrupted. So without further ado, hopefully I will lose my frame for a second and bring in Rob Beaven. Rob, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, mate. Can you hear me okay?
Brilliant. Yes, I think we got you coming in loud and clear. Now, first thing you've got to do is clean up what I've just not given you a town. So where is it that you're based? And also tell the audience a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so I'm in Cirencester in Gloucestershire, down in the southwest. Kind of closest towns are like Gloucester, Cheltenham, that type of area. So just south of those two. Yeah, I run an MDT clinic. We have 15 or so staff members. We have chiros, physios, osteos, podiatrists, sports therapists. Have a MSK radiologist. Am I forgetting anyone? A few reception teams. Yeah, lots of people. All kind of working together, all under kind of the same brand under one roof.
Brilliant.
Which we've been doing 8 years or so.
Fantastic. I to give context on, for those that are tuning in. Obviously, I won't give my full potted history every episode, but in this instance, it's relevant for me to say that this studio, of which we obviously broadcast from, is situated within a fairly classic MSK private practice. It's one of in my office and one of the rooms within a private practice with a gym, etc. A smaller clinic and a newer clinic than Rob's, in that we've been practicing here for only a couple of years, which you can imagine has a novel disruption to our growing business, which was from a standing start in this locality. So we built a facility in this shell of an old supermarket and did it up from scratch, with a intention to certainly be at a stage this year of being a real key year for growth. And so that's been disrupted. So I've got that way in which I'm coming at things. But me and Rob often talk about the similarities between our styles, our ethics in terms of clinical delivery, but also that does seem to bleed into some of the other variables that are around business. So before I throw Rob my first question really and start to reflect on the year we've just had, I want to ask you guys that are tuning in live as to what it's meant for you, if you're either in business or associated to business, if you feel that you are in a situation where you feel you've heard a lot from, say you're not in business, but you've heard from business owners and you're conscious in that direction. Or sometimes there's people being in touch saying that they haven't felt like they've been in touch enough with that side of the industry, be that ours or elsewhere, to really know what the consequences are. So any questions or comments you have, then please do get them in and we'll obviously tune over that together. But obviously the first and obvious question for me, I'd say, Rob, to start with is, just how disruptive has 2020 been when you then think about the business side rather than the clinical side?
So I think, yeah, similar for us, this was going to be we aimed for a growth year for this year. I mean, obviously you're always aiming for a growth year, but we aimed for a growth year. We took on 3 new staff members, kind of close of 2019, beginning of 2020. They were professions that we already had, but we just kind of wanted to expand those professions and kind of move forwards. So obviously, those were people that was building up a patient base, seeing the first few patients and kind of getting into the rhythm of things. Then obviously March happened, which throws a spanner into the works for everyone. However, so it was hugely disruptive. I think it pushed forward a lot of things that we had in mind for kind of the next 5 years, kind of straight away, we had to act on those, moving to the online consults, which is something that we wanted to do a bit more of, but the infrastructure wasn't really in place to kind of have that set up. But very quickly, when the world went online, we had the facilities to do that. It pushed forward other things that we wanted to do. And it made us a bit more adaptable, I probably think. It forced that change where we didn't really have a choice. Unless we went online, we had no access to see any of our patients. So it's disruptive. It was incredibly disruptive, but it forced a lot of good things to come of it, I think.
Sure. Obviously, it's one of the things we've talked about on this show quite a bit in terms of the adapting to virtual. The infrastructure is one thing. The comfort of the clinicians delivering care that way is another. And so the third thing, which definitely cropped up yesterday when I was chatting to Evie, is the fact that there is sometimes a distance between the care style of which we deliver things in the rehab model of empowering and developing self-efficacy of patients. That is something that necessarily isn't perceived by the market, society at large, in such a way that then that despite the delivery being decent, it doesn't mean that necessarily the market's going to respond in the same way. And so what's your experience been in terms of, did all your caseload and all your new patients that would have otherwise inquired, did they just comply with virtual, or was it different to that?
I think this is where the public perception of our professions differ slightly in terms of the physiotherapy versus chiropractic. I think that chiropractic has a bit more of a reputation for that, rightly or wrongly, for that kind of fix me mentality from patients. So I think initially there was a more pushback on that side of the clinic than, say, the physiotherapy side of it. The routine podiatry, chiropody couldn't really function online, besides out of general kind of advice. But the diabetic foot checks and the foot healthcare, there were the diabetes patients that were coming in every 3 weeks, and those type of things, or the elderly care, obviously that couldn't really take place. They were still counted as essential services, so they did a lot of home visits for a lot of those wound care type cases and those type of things. So that kind of wasn't able to go online. I think that it comes down to how we phrased it. And it comes down to your ethos of how you treat your patients. And if you're, as you said, empowering them through that self-efficacy method, then patients don't mind. But with regards to the new patients, I think a lot of people, they book to see a chiropractor. This is what I spoke about at Therapy Live, because often they want to be fixed then and there and walk out again after a quick crack. And the idea of, well, what they're going to do for me online, is quite hard to kind of get that perception right. So it comes down to, I think, how you phrase it. Physiotherapists, I think a lot of people would have had NHS physiotherapists or physiotherapy appointments online before, either through phone calls and Zoom calls. So that was a little bit more easy to accept, I think, for a lot of patients.
Right. Okay. No, it's interesting. What do you think are the variables that people that aren't necessarily in business, or even that might be associated to and work within a private practice, but don't necessarily have the obviously ownership responsibilities that occur? What do you think are the variables that are under recognized or might have passed people by?
Do you mean in terms of economic variables, or
what factors affecting business might have gone under some people's radar? Because it's been a busy year for many people. They're not going to be able to pay attention to stuff that doesn't directly influence them. So I was wondered if we could give them a peek under the hood.
Yeah, I think so. Things that we would pay attention to that they might not necessarily pay things that are kind of the larger economic variables, things like unemployment and kind of levels of disposable income, and kind of the larger variables, which I think the credit crunch, the people that were working or kind of in the industry kind of around that area will be a lot more familiar with. And I think especially in different parts of the country where disposable income dried up to a certain extent, and a lot of people didn't have a lot of spare money, health gets put to the bottom of the pile. And so I think that when we have gaps in the diary or less new patient bookings, those are things that we might look forward to. What's happened? Has there something happened in the news that might have impacted that? Or is there something, is there a policy? Is there potentially a bad news story that may have been affecting it? And I think those are things that we might pay attention to, as opposed to thinking it was necessarily about me. And I think I had that worry when I first started practicing, when I was working for other people. When I was quiet, I thought it was my fault. I mean, occasionally it might have been, but I think that often it was, I'm doing something wrong. I'm always, what have I done wrong? Why don't I have any patients? Whereas often there's a larger scheme at hand that I may not have noticed.
Has that, certainly I might be projecting with this question a little bit, because I think it's something I've certainly felt this year, is that you're trying to be across so many different variables, not just as a clinician, but then also as a clinic owner, but also someone that's recognizing that there's all these broader factors at play that are having more of an overt effect on market forces, as you're mentioning. Has that drawn you thin? Has it been a wearifying year?
No, I think of this year have probably paid attention to it less in terms of how it's impacted my business, purely because COVID has overshadowed everything. So although that, it's something that we've paid attention to, I think that we've kind of taken the wins as they've come in this year, as opposed to, focusing on not the negatives, because that's the wrong way to put it, because everyone was going through the same situation. But, there were so many factors outside of our control this year that I think that I didn't almost want to drown myself in small data.
No, it's a great point.
Yeah. So I think I think last year I paid attention to these a lot more and looked a lot more at, the healthcare policies and looking where the spending was going from the government, in terms of public health. And then that could then dictate probably my marketing, my branding, and where I put my resources, depending on that in my local area. Whereas this year I haven't done that anywhere near as much.
That has been one thing that's been interesting, isn't it? When things are so chaotic and it feels like it's an impossible task to then try to read it, it does somehow take some pressure off. When it's something that feels like it's some data or some variables that if you paid enough attention to, they could influence your reasoning, it feels tempting to spend time in that direction. But when it's just utter chaos and you just can't, and it's also too high a risk strategy to sort of spend time sort of tending to those, because it could well be wasted the next day when the next hammer drops politically. So yeah, it's a really interesting point. I think on a personal level, is it something that you feel like the circumstances of the year, because everything's been disrupted and everyone's been challenged in incredibly unique ways, but I suppose it's just that compared to, let's say, a stable public sector income, and granted, you've plenty of public sector workers under very unique challenges too, but one of those challenges isn't, can I keep the lights on? So what would you feel like are you getting to, as I am, getting to a point, as I announced at the intro, wanting to make sure I have a couple of weeks downtime, because that's all I've been able to have this year?
Yeah, I haven't had any downtime. For those who don't know me, I'm very similar situation to you. I've got a 10.5-month-old this year, and that he was born right at the beginning of lockdown. And since we had 4 to 6 weeks off, kind of those first few weeks right at the very beginning when everything went online, and then we kind of slowly went back with emergency care. And so since May, I think we went back, I haven't had any longer than a weekend off, really. I think similar to you. So I'm actually really looking forward to kind of a week off over Christmas. The way that Christmas falls means we're quite lucky with the bank holidays to have that downtime. So I'm quite looking forward to switching off completely, really. And I don't think you ever 100% switch off. And I think that's what, as business owners, we would appreciate more than people that aren't business owners, people that work for us, or, people that are working for someone else. They have much greater ability to switch off. Whereas, when emails come in, it's hard not to check them when it's something directly impacting your business. So you always kind of have that. You want to react and put out fires just in case they are, being lit somewhere, I guess.
And also just, dispositionally, I think me and you are sort of peas in a pod when it comes to the fact that even almost when you quieten down the noise in your head in other things, you can't help but be tempted, because it's sort of a pride of passion to what we do. So we can be off work, but if anything, that's probably when man in your WhatsApp might light up strategizing and scheming and thinking. Sometimes it's because there's that overlap, isn't there, between the personal and the professional.
Yeah, my problem is I spend too much time. I say too much time this year, less, but I spend time reading, and as most people do. And when you have a downtime, and I read a lot of kind of non-fiction type stuff, and I kind of think about a lot of, I chew a lot of stuff over, without no pun intended, when I'm reading, and the amount of ideas and things that come into my head in my downtime is actually when I want to act on them. And it's that old adage, isn't it? If you're passionate about what you do, you're never actually working. But but you're still not spending time with the family, so it is a hard trade-off. But
I know. Yeah, well, that adage was decent until the kids arrived, and then you do have these moments in which you need to not be working when there's nappy to change, etc. And there's something that needs to be delineated and protected. And this year's been tough for that, hasn't it? For really interesting reasons. Now, we've got some comments coming in, which is brilliant. Thank you very much. That question, if you didn't, that I asked you guys, if you're tuning in live, is just give me your take on the year in terms of if you're in business, then how have you got on? And also then if you're not, how do you feel that, what are you in the know on? What do you want to know more about? Any questions you might have coming in? Unfortunately, for some reason, it's been doing this on Restream a little bit, where it's not giving me the names of certain Facebook users. And this one, I suspect, is Matt Scarsbrook. Just because
it is Matt Scarsbrook. I can see.
It is.
It is.
For some reason, it's not. It's just showing Facebook user for some reason. But yeah, Matt then reflecting on the year, saying it's chaotic times. He's mentioning then that as a non-HCPC practitioner, that is relevant, isn't it? The fact that it's been something that there's certain professionals have been more disrupted than others that have then gone on to be more protected, and physios and chiropractors by name able to certainly remain open in the second lockdown compared to the first one. And he's also then clearly taken the opportunity. So I won't read out Matt's lengthy post, but he's mentioned about the fact that he's then started his MSc, started a podcast, worked with us on Therapy Live stuff. And so he's then looking at the opportunities, especially at what 2021's bringing. And so I want to use that as a point to ask you, Rob, as to great challenge does bring great opportunity. And is that cheesy silver lining style blue sky thinking of all the ways, or is that actually how you're feeling at the moment when you look on to what 2021 brings?
Yeah, I think 2020 has given us all an opportunity to reflect on what's important, and whether that's the amount of changes that have happened in businesses, and even outside of healthcare, people that have moved businesses, changed professions, changed jobs, started up their own businesses is huge, which is fantastic to see. You walk down our high street, although we're in the fortunate position that we're in tier 2 when we're open.
Oh, don't show off, Rob.
I know, sorry.
Cool.
But there's new businesses still open, and these people that might have worked in public sectors before and now wanted to do their own thing. So I think it's given a lot of time to kind of reflect. And when I do that, obviously we've got some things that we're going to kind of discuss coming on to later, which is an exciting project. I've had some own projects as well. My wife's had time to do some stuff that she's wanted to do as well for a long time. So it has given us that time to reflect and kind of sit and think about what direction do we want to take it? What is actually important to us? Is it just, drive, or is it take a step back? And, I've taken a bit of a step back from clinical work. So I now only do 3 days a week as opposed to kind of the 5. So I've got 2 days to work, on the business as opposed to kind of in the business or follow other side projects or side hustles, which is, another fashionable term for it. So kind of, so I think you have given a lot of time for reflection, and I think you've been in a similar kind of situation as well to think about what's important to you and which route kind of you want to follow next year.
Absolutely, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I can only wave all that through really, and it applies to me too. I think that I'm excited as you are with the think about how many incredible business plans were written when in lockdown. Think about those now. As for whether or not we've got the social circumstances and the parameters around it that might help that thrive, let's not get lost in politics right now. But it's kind of that that opportunity is so underestimated because there's so many things that are so unknown, and the creativity that might have come from this adversity. And I suppose I have an example of that. Obviously, we flexed into something that felt quite natural, but also the opportunity that knocked with Therapy Live, whereby essentially people, I don't know, you did that in 10 weeks. Well, we did that in 10 weeks because we were stood on 7 years worth of good faith, goodwill, a great network, incredible speakers that knew that it was a smart time for us to try and help the industry to raise standards and to share quality information and to create. And all we did was provide the infrastructure. So it wasn't a standing start 10 weeks. It was an opportunity that knocked that few others might be able to do. Now that's just my example. Obviously, very proud of that work. But the reason I bring it up is because that's my one example of which there'll be so many people that have done something like that, had to be quite radical in what they then did to roll the dice in order to make sure that they didn't go under. For want of a better phrase, really. And it's that those were some of the challenges that businesses faced, and also not necessarily unstable businesses, just ones that happened to have badly timed certain investments. And we were not dissimilar. I sit in a clinic that was carrying refurb debts that we were expecting to have paid off by now. And so instead, you're actually facing new challenges whereby you need to pull a rabbit out of the hat entrepreneurially. And so that's just our examples. You multiply that hundreds and thousands of times over and think what might come from that challenge, and it's quite exciting to see how that might emerge. So no, that's really good. Katie's put a lovely comment here about the active brain, businesses' responsibilities. It's really hard to have downtime. She's sort of reflecting on that point that Robert made about the personal and private, sometimes personal and professional getting naturally blurred. With regards to the landscape of interprofessional working, it's sometimes, and it's funny, I admittedly don't. And I don't know, maybe you don't see it the same, but I forget. I get enough in conversation with someone like you, and it's very quite genuinely don't even give a shit enough to remember that we happen to be of different flavors of certificate on our wall, as I describe it, right? But it's still relevant. Has this circumstance or this year improved those relations, or what we're passionate about, which is actually like the quality of the clinician regardless of badge, or has it actually drove wedges, which is not this, kind of a bit of what Matt said kind of reflects on that as well?
I think it has, in my small bubble, from what I've seen, and I think social media is a good example of that. And I'm probably sitting in a good place to visualize it, being kind of from looking at both camps. I think it has united more multidisciplinary, healthcare professionals than I've ever seen before. And I think a big reason of that is social media. And I think that a prime example is, 5,000 people in our, Gemma's physio support group, which I know you've spoken to her about it before and various things. We see examples on there all the time of, people just discussing whether it's cases, whether it's referrals, whether it's, a patient with a certain problem, it's kind of highlighted that we're all in the same situation together. We all do the same thing. We all have patients coming to us for the same problems. And that has highlighted it more than ever. And I think that people are seeing that and going, oh, actually, I would have approached that case in the very same way to that person, whether that's a sports rehab expert, whether it's an osteopath, whether it's a physio, whether it's a chiro, whether it's a massage therapist, whatever it might be. And I think that it's shown how much unity and how much cross similarities there are between us. So I like to think that this has improved, not that I wouldn't say there was a bad blood, but improved relationships, this year more than ever before.
On a governance level, I suppose the only reason it could have driven wedges, and I think that has alleviated since first lockdown, but the fact that there was a potential chance whereby there could be separation of legal allowance to practice. And
there was at the beginning.
Yeah.
So we had on our, and it was the therapist were being given different advice. So we had physios, osteos, and chiros who were allowed to come back to see emergency patients, whereas sports therapists weren't. And so we had that difficulty of patients saying, well, why I can come to see my physiotherapist, but I can't come to see the sports therapist, but they're doing the same thing to me. And it was quite hard to justify that. And I felt very sorry for a lot of those people. And I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not sure what the decisions were made, but it was very difficult to see that.
Suddenly the regulators mattered, which was hilarious. My opinion on this, and it's fairly strong in that I just think that I'm fascinated forever and clearly, there could be still always plenty of room for me to be wrong on this, but the nominal paper exercises that regulate our professions, and I'm painting with a broad brush there on purpose, really, because I feel like I do understand and have studied the chiro and osteo governance especially, but there is a relevant difference between General Chiropractic Council, General Osteopathic Council, and the HCPC's regulatory framework underneath the PSA, of which is the direct relationship with people like sports rehabilitators. That suddenly mattered, right? That was something that I was a nerd for even knowing about because of my work with MSKR. Suddenly that became talk of the town, didn't it? And that has been a benefit in many ways for me, is that it's drawn attention to the relevance of that governance infrastructure nationally for what is professional injustice for some of those professionals, and also for the quality clinicians that, it's just hilarious, in your clinic, for example, if you're a really quality sports rehabber that's working as one of your MSK team that no one cares about their degree in your staff room, Yet they can't practice, but a new graduate, fresh-faced physio might still be of good quality. Suddenly they could take on their list. Why? Under what reason? It just seems fascinating, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it was they were lumped together with from what I was aware, it was massage therapists, and that kind of was lumped under the beauty sector as opposed to the healthcare sector, and that's
massage parlors
kind of
close is what they'd said. Yeah.
Exactly, that's kind of the divide, and it kind of stemmed from that. I'm thinking, hang on, that are the regulators misinterpreting what people are doing? But that's I guess maybe that's the conversation for a different day.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we can't get too lost in that because we've got the big news to announce, of course.
Yes.
And I want to talk to you a bit about that. Obviously, for final call for any questions or comments for us, but we'll get to them after the fact, of course. Katie's agreeing and saying that it absolutely needs a huge overhaul. Thanks, Katie. I agree. Now, me and Rob have been talking about this topic and many others like it, and coming to realize that, especially at the moment, there isn't enough general chit-chat about therapy business. And what Gemma's support group has done is two things. It's kind of the fact that it needed to exist is hilarious, right? The fact that there's so many different groups and governing bodies and even people chattering online. But when it came to the crunch, people really needed to try and work out what they needed to do, what was legal, where they should source the PPE and just gain some sensible guidance. It became a challenge. And so our heroine, Gemma Oliver, stepped up and provided us something. But it also meant that essentially some of the things that then are accessible about therapy business is sometimes then guru-led, Americanized, regurgitation of a sales book. And this is my way, and this is how we do it, and this is how you can get 150 patients a day. So me and Rob have been frustrated by that, and those two variables have inspired us to then do a podcast called Therapy Business Matters, and we're going to be launching that in the coming weeks. I'm going to say we're going to get this out for Christmas because we're recording this later today, and so I'm really excited to bring that forward. Rob, what's your thoughts on it, and what you're looking forward to for us on this new platform?
I'm looking forward to coming to it from a standpoint where we're not experts in this area. We have experience, but we're far from experts in these topics from running a business. And I think that having us chat around trials and tribulations and what worked for us, what didn't work for us, I think will be beneficial for a lot of people. I think that, a lot of stuff that we've listened to in the past, you almost feel bad when you listen to it because it's people kind of, oh, this is how you should do it, X, Y, and Z. It's my way or the highway. Whereas, we've tried lots of those different ways and lots of them didn't work. So just us kind of, as you said, general chit chat, long form, short form questions, I'm sure, from both of us, is just a good way just to explore the topics. And then when we need to get experts on to come and, talk around, a particular topic that we, feel needs to be broached at that time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is that we want to try and make it a space in which we can discuss things and reflect on mistakes that have been made and trials and tribulations, as you described it, so that people don't have to make them themselves, right? We need to create a community atmosphere. If you think about what the costs are, and by that I don't mean necessarily in pocket, I mean the opportunity costs. If you have to learn all the mistakes that we've had to learn, like why, as a collaborative community of practice that we're trying to create around Physio Matters, why on earth is it that the circumstances mean that you need to lose money, lose time, lose opportunity to help more people? If your style of practice is anything in keeping with the sensibilities we're trying to promote clinically, why should you need to learn those lessons yourself rather than we can reflect on them and try and kick you forward?
Exactly right. It's standing on the shoulders of stuff that we've learned, basically, isn't it?
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that we're going to start off with a bang is we're going to do what are our key mistakes that we've made and lessons that we've learned. That's how we're going to really boot things off. So that's something that we're excited to bring to you. But also we're going to be visiting and bringing on experts that we've then worked and learned from in marketing, in sales, in understanding the sort of ethical trials and tribulations. I'm using that phrase yet again because it really is a tug of war internally. And we're going to, no doubt, come to some, me and Rob disagree on plenty, but for the sake of, we're both professional devil's advocates, and we'll be challenging each other and also learning a lot about each other's businesses and the relative similarities and differences that we kind of come to. So really looking forward to getting stuck into that and bringing you another addition to what is now a podcast network through Physio Matters.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited to be joining the team and doing it with you, mate.
No, thanks a lot. That's brilliant. So tell folk a little bit about where they can find out you, give you sort of social media handles, etc., and then we better jump off and get recording, mate.
Yeah, of course, mate. Yeah, so I'm on all of the usual social medias. I'm probably most active on Twitter, which is at Rob Chiro. I am on Instagram, but I very rarely use it. I don't really understand it, so I don't like to use it. So catch me on Twitter if you actually want to discuss anything interesting.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that we might be across all social media. Don't mean we check them all. So no,
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks a lot. Sorry, I tried to be smart then, and I had this out as like a news broadcast thing. But then as soon as I pull any more comments on, it's then covering the entire screen. But thanks, Joe Turner. She's made a comment there saying it's great news. She'd include herself in it. And therapy business owners have been able to get away without digging particularly deeply about how they run and develop their businesses. It'd be great to have people on the ground in the same boat leading on this. That's what we're trying to do, and I'm glad that Joe's picked up on that. Is that we're certainly on the therapy business show. We're not suddenly then trying to advertise for jobs at our own clinics. We're not suddenly got some sort of product or service to shill for. We're going to be as objective as we can be, just trying to raise standards as we do across the rest of our work. But in this particular thing, we think it deserves and needs a specific focus rather than just the occasional nod to it on this show or elsewhere. Let's be more focused and really try to drag things up and be a community of practice that really supports each other to learn from mistakes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Right, I'll see you soon, mate. We'll jump over onto Zoom and get recording.
Of course. Thanks for having me, mate.
Hey, mate.
Cheers, guys.